What if I told you that the roots of Philippine diplomacy, governance, and even modern inequality can be traced back to a trade route, a group of priests, and a reform policy that backfired? Today, we're deep diving into Spanish colonial Philippines, not just as history, but as a living framework that still shapes foreign policy, governance, and global relations today. If you're preparing for an FSO exam, this isn't just a review. This is your strategic lens. Before colonization, the Philippines was not uncivilized. It was decentralized. Barangays led by datus operated independently, but they were trading with China, India, and Southeast Asia. They are practicing animism and Islam, and already part of a regional system. For a diplomatic insight, even before Spain, the Philippines was already engaged in proto international relations, trade alliances, and cultural exchange. But everything changes in the 16th century. In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan arrives. In 1565, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi establishes Cebu settlement. And in 1571, Manila became the colonial capital. Spain introduces a centralized government, Christianity as state religion, and integration into a global empire. Here is your key shift from decentralized barangays to hierarchical colonial state. The system was highly structured. They have the Governor General, which is a king's representative, Audiencia, which is the Supreme Court, alcaldes and corregidores, the provincial control, cabeza de barangay and principalia are the local intermediaries. The principalia are the native elites. They are the former datos or the local leaders. They collect taxes or tributo. They enforce labor or pollo y servicios. And they're given privileges. There's no taxes, no forced labor. For diplomatic insight, Spain ruled through indirect governance, a model still seen in modern geopolitical influence. Here's the truth. In many towns, the friar was more powerful than the governor. Religious orders included the Augustinians, they are the pioneers, the Franciscans, the grassroots missionaries, the Dominicans, they are into education and doctrine, and the Jesuits, they provided elite education and science. The friars controlled education records, which are birth, marriage, and death records, the moral authority, and the local politics. Here's a gold line. The fusion of church and state created a system where spiritual authority reinforced political control. This was the first global trade network across the Pacific. The route from Manila to Acapulco, Mexico, and vice versa. What are the goods? In Asia, they trade silk, porcelain, and spices. In Americas, they trade silver. Here's the key reality. The Philippines did not produce. It re-exported. Now, what are the effects? Positive effects, Manila became a global trade hub. It connected Asia, the Americas, and Europe. Now, what are the negative effects? There's no local industry development. There's heavy economic dependency. And there's a greater inequality. Here's your diplomatic insight. This is early globalization and a classic example of dependent economies, which is still relevant today. In the 18th century, Spanish tried to fix its empire. Their goals: to centralize the power, to increase revenue, to reduce friar influence, and to promote free trade. They call it the Bourbon reforms, a reform that backfired. Now, what are the key changes that happened afterwards? A massive decline of galleon trade. There's a rise of export economy. and it developed more secular clergy in the Filipinos. This became a critical turning point. About the secularization controversy, a conflict emerged between the Spanish friars, which are the regular clergy, and the Filipino priests, which are the secular clergy. Now, for the Filipino clergy, they demanded equal treatment and control of the parishes. And this actually started as a religious issue that became a political issue. What started as a religious issue became a political issue. Now let's talk about the 1872 Cavite Mutiny. There was a small uprising in the Cavite arsenal. Spain exaggerated it into a national conspiracy. They used this as a justification to suppress the reformists. Now, who are those reformists and how they suppressed them? Let's talk about the rise of Gomburza, the martyrs. We have Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. What they actually did, they advocated for secularization. They asked for equality within the church. They were reformists, not revolutionaries. Now what happened? False accused of rebellion. Executed on February 17, 1872 at Bagong Bayan. What is the impact? Their death sparked Filipino nationalism. Their execution deeply influenced Jose Rizal, the Ilustrado class, and the propaganda movement. This eventually leads to the Philippine Revolution in 1896. This isn't just history, it's blueprint. The colonial governance leading to the modern bureaucracy. Centralized administration is still very visible today. From church-state tensions to policy debates, this is seen in education, reproductive health, and local governance. Economic dependency to global south issues. Galleon trade mirrors modern export dependence and unequal trade relations. Reform versus revolution. Gomburza shows that reform movements can be misinterpreted and suppression can radicalize populations. A diplomatic insight. Understanding colonial history helps explain the political behavior, the institutional weakness, and the foreign policy positioning. Now let's do a comparative analysis. Spanish versus American colonial strategy. For Spain, they use religion and centralized control. They limit the education, and they are very extractive with the economy. But for the United States, they move to secular governance, mass education, and institutional development. Here's a key insight. Spain provoked nationalism. US managed nationalism. For final synthesis, you can memorize this. From barangays to empire, from friar rule to reform, from reform to suppression, and from suppression to nationalism. The Spanish colonial system did not collapse because it was weak, but because it attempts to modernize, expose its contradiction. So if you're preparing for the FSO exam, don't just memorize. Understand the patterns. Power versus legitimacy, reform versus resistance, global trade versus local development. Because diplomacy isn't just about the present, it's about seeing the past inside the present. If you found this helpful, keep reviewing, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.